All right, Russell, glad to have you here today. I'm with Russell Lester. He's the CFO of Tropic. And Russell, I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of CFOs over the years. In fact, I've reported them at a couple different companies now. And in my current role, I get to consult with finance leaders and other CFOs. And budget season seems to be one of those painful times of year where it requires a lot of input, a lot of work. It seems like all hand on deck, and it almost feels like sometimes people are kind of not looking forward to it, if I can put it that way. Whereas I'm just wondering, like, is that the case, or is that a perception, or does it need to be that way? Talk to me a little bit about your thoughts around, budget season, which I'm assuming you're kicking off right about now.
Tis the season. We are. If you're on a fiscal year that is calendar based, this is the time. And if you haven't kicked off, you soon will be. And you're right. People approach the process with a lot of consternation and stress. And I think it's a byproduct of if you're not approaching planning and budgeting with an always planning mindset, then it is this seasonal heavy lift. And for many people, they may feel like they put far more into it than they get out of it. And I think all of those things come from if you approach it with the wrong filter or lens, because good planning that's done properly is beneficial to the company. It acts as a form of alignment. It brings together resourcing conversations that you may not have during the year. It allows you an opportunity to look under the hood of your business and ask questions of your business that you may or may not be asking. And so I think it's a fantastic opportunity for reflection, but it can also be a really heavy lift as you try to track down data that maybe you're not tracking regularly, or align people in ways that maybe you're not aligning them around regularly. So it really runs the gamut depending upon what your operating cadence looks like day to day. So there are companies where the planning process is not this huge heavy lift, and companies where it is absolutely something that can bring the whole company to its knees.
Can I ask a question? Has the budgeting, maybe the importance of budgeting, changed over the past couple of years? Recognizing it's always been important, but and I'm not trying to ask a leading question, is it more important in this market than it was 3 years ago?
Yeah, well, I mean, 3 years ago, you have basically zero interest rate happening, and in that environment, liquidity was free and flowing, and people were throwing money at growth. And it's not that the planning practitioners and the financial resources, we were still running the same cadence, but the scrutiny was different. And the flexibility was different. The runways were longer, the capital was flowing more freely, and so there wasn't the same level of rigor and scrutiny on the investment side of the P&L.
Well,
So fast forward to
and I'm not a finance expert, but what I hear you saying, and tell me if this is right or wrong, but the importance of being accurate is probably higher today than it was before. Because if we weren't accurate from a budget perspective 3 years ago, but money was, to your point, free or zero interest rate, then not that big of a deal. Or am I oversimplifying there?
No, you're not. I mean, think about the consequence of missing if cash and runway are paramount importance, and there's any variance, how does that variance get funded? I mean, if it's an upside variance, okay, but most of the time you're worried about a downside variance of softer revenue or higher expense. And so all that does is it creates more pressure on the business to go and find how you're going to fund that variance. So accuracy is more important than ever.
Okay. And would you say, I'm a procurement guy, as you know, so that's all I've ever kind of done.
Well, I love you anyway, in spite of that.
Okay. All right, we're gonna move on from that. I'm glad. Great comment there. But do you find that the relationship between finance and procurement has changed from a budgeting perspective? Like, are you relying more heavily on your procurement counterparts than you have historically?
I think the visibility of that reliance is becoming more clear, and the specificity of the reliance is clear. I do think finance and procurement have long had a very strong symbiotic relationship. I think the formalization of that relationship and the clear swim lanes and handoffs between them has matured over the past several years. And so I think what you see today is often cases where either procurement is reporting up through finance formally,
Yeah, see that?
or
Yeah.
or certainly partnered heavily with finance because they're solving at the root. We're solving for the same things. We're trying to achieve the same outcomes.
Okay, so grab your magic wand, and if you could ask anything of your procurement team, say, data, insights, et cetera, like what in an ideal world, what do you want from them to help you have a successful budget season?
Yeah, I mean, the budget inevitably begins with that extract of where am I spending my money today, and what I would ask my procurement partner is where is the spend inefficient? Where are there leakages? Where is there what I call spoilage? So overlap, leakage, spoilage can look like lots of different things, but it could be a combination of, it could be unexpected expenditures. So it's basically, I'm looking for visibility. I'm looking for input on where do we think we're spending more than we should be, to which understanding price benchmarking would be important. Where are we spending money where we don't believe the utilization is where we thought it would be, or the original use case for why we invested has shifted? Where are we spending money where there's overlapping of capabilities? And so it can look like lots of different things, but that's why I call it spoilage or leakage, which we're spending money and we're not getting a commensurate amount of return based on that investment. And the procurement practitioner will have their hand on the pulse of that because they're looking at those contracts every single day.
Yeah. So you're looking for, hey, I want to know, make sure I'm getting a good deal, that there's not inefficiencies from a benchmarking perspective. You want to know if there's opportunities to consolidate, rationalize. You want to probably look at utilization data to make sure we don't have a bunch of shelfware out there. What about trends? What about where pricing is going? Like what kind of information are you looking for to kind of forecast out, and also how far are you looking to forecast out?
What a very timely question. There are articles out recently that per user, per seat pricing may be undergoing a transformation where companies that were locked into that model, but we're seeing restructuring and headcount reductions across the board. That would naturally mean that every company across SaaS is downsizing what they're spending. So what's happening? Those vendors are smart. They're transforming their pricing model to transactional based models or hybrid models where they have both per seat, per user and transactional based. And so we need the procurement team or capabilities to stay on top of those trends, because if you're not modeling for that in the budget process and you just assume the pricing will stay per user or per seat, and you're going to reduce your headcount and you assume you're going to save money, but meanwhile the vendor comes in with a pricing change that you weren't on top of, guess what? Now you've got a budget variance that you've got to go find, and no one wants that.
Yeah, and by the way, as a procurement person, for a long time I thought, gosh, that's an incredible burden because I'm covering a very broad swath of spend for maybe a small team, big company, broad suppliers, et cetera. You can't do this alone as a procurement person. Like, you need a tool, you need that benchmarking, you need something to help you move from this idea of being a procurement generalist to a procurement specialist. And so a tool is going to help supplement that information, so that way I have that information that I can share with you. I think that's really, really important key call out. Okay, so now we've given you that information. Are you looking to do this on a supplier basis? Are you looking to, forecast your costs? I've heard the term peanut butter spread. Talking to me, like, how granular are you getting?
Well, this is where it does vary by company stage. It varies by CFO style. But if you're asking me what I like to do, is I do like vendor level spend estimates. And let me explain why. Yes, I could empower my budget owners with one lump sum amount that they could, as you say, peanut butter spread throughout the year, and they just manage to that amount. And I don't feel like the alternative is that dichotomous or opposite, but it is different, which is if we dig into vendor level targets, then our variance analysis is a lot easier to do when you're operating in year and you're looking and saying, why did our expenses come in different than we anticipated? It also fast forwards the rigor that we're already going to get to anyway. Yeah. And so inevitably, CFOs today are now more on top of, because of data, we're more on top of the utilization rates, the expense rates, and we're familiar with these brands and these tool names when we're doing our budget versus actual in the current year. So we know the tools that are the leading drivers of that. So we're going to ask that anyway. So why not ask that in the budget process? Why not get to that level of rigor and specificity when you're doing the budget? The reason you don't is if you don't have the data, or administering the data and handing out the targets is just too complicated to manage to, and therefore then you go with a peanut butter spread.
So it sounds like you're maybe reverting to a peanut butter spread model if you don't have sufficient data, if you don't have the right data points. Is that correct?
I think that's a fair characterization. Again, with the caveat being that it's just some CFOs, their style or preference might be trust and empower the budget owners, let them manage to it. Okay. All I need to know is that you're managing to the total. I just feel like if you do that as CFO, you're lacking the connectedness to the business of what we're spending and why we're spending it, and you're missing out on the opportunities to have a bit of the check and balance conversation. Because I think when finance and procurement are asking those tough questions at the vendor level, it creates a nice check and balance and a reminder that we're not just spending freely. We're not like we were 3 years ago where spend control didn't matter.
Well, and that's a good point. Spend control does matter. And having talked to a lot of finance leaders over the past year or so, I think the ones that are having the most success are the ones that can get the company bought in on this concept rather than viewing it as a procurement task, or rather than viewing it as a responsibility of finance. And so maybe, do you have some ideas around how you can get the company bought into this idea of not only spend management, but also, hey, we have this budget, we need to operate to this budget. So how do we, do that successfully?
I do. I'm so glad you asked this question. And the reason is that in my career, I've seen a lot of enthusiasm and momentum and celebration around what we would call the top line of the P&L, right? Top line being revenue.
Totally.
And so, as you know, there are contests and President's Club and rewards, and we celebrate in company meetings when we book new business and when we retain large customers. And my experience has been, we do not typically reward, celebrate, or create visibility around the bottom of the P&L, the expense side, where we're driving efficiencies. And the irony there is where cash is so important and liquidity is so important, managing your expenses wisely drives the same or more scalable benefit as does driving revenue opportunities. So what if? What if we were able to create an environment where we celebrated, rewarded, and made very visible those wins that we have on the expense side of the P&L? I think there's a huge opportunity to do that. It would be transformative, and it would begin to connect people, because the problem is we tell people, spend like it's your own money. Have you ever heard that in the budget cycle?
For sure. Yeah, 100%.
And what happens? People, they hear that, but it's like, but it's not my money. It's company money, out of sight, out of mind. But if we created this culture of celebration, well, we know people are motivated towards recognition and visibility, and suddenly we can reward other parts of the business. And it's not at the expense. We should still greatly celebrate all the wins on the sales and renewal side. but let's also celebrate, reward, and make visible those wins that we're driving on the expense side.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that because I've certainly been in this scenario where we go find some savings, right? Maybe we're able to reduce some licenses. Maybe we're able to, go without a tool. And then there's this expectation a lot of times where the stakeholders like, hey, great, now I want to reinvest that money in a tool on their team. But then finance comes to me. I said, hey, good news, Russell. I saved, or we saved, $100,000 on this one tool. He's like, great, where is it? Like, well, we spent it on another tool. And is that really savings? How does that resonate with you?
Yeah, so I have two other concepts. So the first one I broadly call levers and leakages. And when I talk about levers and leakages, I'm talking about the repeatable, scalable process of the company identifying ways to make the P&L engine run more efficiently. Obviously, a lever is something that you can accelerate. A leakage is something you want to stop, which is draining your P&L. But as you drive that flywheel and you generate opportunity and benefit, there's a second concept that I have called center of table. And it is maybe not common and it is not always popular, but once leadership teams understand it, they're in favor of it. Center of table says, as a budget owner, when I identify and unlock $100,000 of efficiency or expense savings, I don't just go and spend that on something else and then come back to finance and say, well, I met my budget, but I spent money on something I didn't even tell you I was going to spend money on. Rather, we put it to the center of table for the leadership team to talk through and say, we've now found some efficiencies. What is the best way we can use that money together as a team to hit our company goals and targets? And again, it's not about removing autonomy or empowerment from the budget owner. It could feel that way. It could look that way. It is about making sure the company is advancing against its priorities in the best way possible, because very often, if the case is solid, that leader will be able to reinvest some of that money. But it shouldn't just be a blank check automatic, because if you do that, it reverts back to what I would call lazy spending, or back to the days where liquidity was just freely flowing. So we want to reinforce that rigor even when you unlock and find opportunities.
And it feels like the budgeting season's a really powerful tool to accomplish this task, because you can maybe set budgets a little bit lower than what's being requested, with the concept of, hey, everyone go out and find ways to reduce budget, but then you can keep some in reserve to say, okay, now that we've accomplished that, here now there's extra budget that we can take requests and then prioritize them, not at the individual department level, but at the company level. Is that in line with this center of table methodology?
Yeah, top of funnel, we will have what we call need to find or gap closers, or, there's always this concept where the quota is higher than the company revenue target. You create stretch. There's these different terms that are very familiar top of funnel and on the revenue side of the P&L. But the same is true on the expense side. There's no reason in your planning process that you couldn't look at your tech stack spend relative to benchmark and say, it's clear we've got room here to reduce. We don't know exactly where we're going to cut or what opportunities will come up, but we're going to goal ourselves on whatever 10% reduction in overall tech stack spend.
And just to be clear, if you have a good procurement, as you said at the very beginning, who can give you these insights on where they can cut, that can be a little more surgical, right?
Far easier when you have that, because then you have a roadmap. You ideally even have your top 10 vendors or contracts that you're going to look into first.
Yeah.
And some rationalization as to whether that 10% is achievable.
Got it. Awesome. I'm thinking back to other companies I've worked for, and as a leader, a lot of times there'll be some sort of like company, bonus structure, right? And I think back to where sometimes that bonus structure was based off of a formulaic approach of, hey, revenues, did we hit a certain revenue target? Retention, did we hit a certain retention number? Maybe I don't know, expansion. But to your point, they were all kind of top of the line kind of metrics, it'd be interesting to maybe incorporate some sort of, hey, we also have a goal to find $5 million as a company in efficiencies, in savings, and then, bake that into a part of your, part of a, leader bonus. Or have you seen that done effectively before, or is that not a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, companies that are operating profitably do often goal on EBITDA,
Okay.
and or some measure of some derivative of profitability. So you see that, and then you've got companies that are in high growth mode that are close to break even or barely break even or aren't break even, and it becomes less relevant that they goal the company on that because the tension is always we don't want to distract people from driving growth. And so there is this balance, but I think there is a way to create formal goals that are held company wide and that everyone benefits from by unlocking those efficiencies. And it could even be things. Think about an environment where you set various hurdle rates of efficiency gains, and maybe the grand prize that the whole company wins is a trip for the entire company to some tropical location. Wouldn't that be cool?
That would be cool.
I think people would work for that, right? They would work together and work to find opportunities to hit that efficiency target.
And it's funded in part by these savings, or actually the savings, a part of that is then taken to fund this trip, right? So
That's right.
It's
You
self-funded.
redeploy it. It's self-funding in that way.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, last topic before we close, AI. How are you seeing AI impact, the budget process? I don't know if there's, best practices or if you're starting to play around with it. Maybe it's a way to gain more accurate data, drive efficiencies. Any thoughts about, incorporating artificial intelligence, generative AI?
Everybody's thinking about AI. Everybody's trying to figure out the right way to use it. CFOs are trying to balance the risk of using AI with the rewards. We don't want spurious results. We don't want a misuse or an abuse of AI. But I say all that to say AI is very positioned to help analyze, ingest, and automate a lot of mundane, tasks that could be repetitive, whether it's matching of information, whether it's finding overlaps that we spoke about earlier, whether it's creating recommendations based on previous patterns, because AI can do the pattern analysis type of work very efficiently and effectively. And what does that do? It frees up those resources in the business that are having to do that matching and overlap and efficiency gain work manually. It frees them up to do higher value work that they may find more interesting and more enjoyable anyway. And so I think AI is an accelerator to the budget process. I think if you're not looking into it, you're already behind. And I think that we just want to balance that we don't do AI for AI's sake, and actually that we don't call something AI that is not even AI. And that's what you've got to be wary of.
Yep.
A lot of people out there are claiming to be AI enabled, AI powered, and I would argue they're doing little more than an index match or a VLOOKUP that one would do, or a sum if then embedded nested if statements in Excel, and they're calling that AI. And so we want it to truly be machine learning and truly be AI. Huge opportunity, and we're kind of in the steep curve of figuring out how to use that properly and well in the office of the CFO. But I think over the next year, you're going to see lots of tools light up, lots of opportunity there, lots of momentum, and we're definitely looking into it ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like in my experience working and supporting the budgeting process, it feels like a lot of times there's assumptions being made. And I don't think that that'll ever completely change to where it's a complete science and you can forecast 100%. But I would expect, AI, but also just even a lot of the better access to data and benchmarks and supplier trends and supplier intelligence, all of those things will make it so the assumptions are fewer or at least more accurate. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I mean, imagine a world where you supplement a procurement practitioner's knowledge and expertise with an AI model that's being trained on these pricing structure changes and notices that there are vendors that follow a leading vendor's pricing adjustments. And if it's able to detect that anomaly and the leading vendor adjusts their price, and then they can flag that another price adjustment is likely to occur with these vendors, that's when you begin to get to the predictive side of AI that could be really compelling and interesting.
Okay, awesome. Well, Russell, thank you for taking some time today. I'll let you get back to budgeting season. I'm sure that's top
Thank you.
of mind for you, but really appreciate your thoughts there, and good luck in the next few months as you budget for next year.
Thanks so much. Really enjoyed the conversation. Happy to chat about this type of stuff anytime.